Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be doing my presentation on Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, and I'm going to be focusing on the theme of war and how it psychologically impacted the main character Billy. I just wanted to give a quick heads up that my presentation is based on my own personal interpretation of the novel, where it's kind of focusing on Billy's time travel not being real. So, just a heads up on that. Not saying it's the only way to interpret it, but that's what I will be talking about today. So, just a quick little summary of the novel. Slaughterhouse 5 is an account of Billy Pilgrim's capture and incarceration by the Germans during the last years of World War II, and scattered throughout the narrative are episodes from Billy's life both before and after the war, and from his travels to the planet Tralfamadore. So, for my presentation, I kind of broke it up into three little categories, which the first one is talking about war and Kurt Vonnegut. The second is talking about the psychological impacts of war on Billy, and then end comments, including challenges of the novel, outline of my paper's argument, and some final questions. So, I'm going to be starting off talking about war and Kurt Vonnegut, his real life versus what happens in the novel. So, the main storyline of the novel revolves around Billy Pilgrim and his time serving in World War II. This is almost exactly based on Kurt Vonnegut's real life and experiences during the war. Vonnegut enlisted in the U.S. Army at the age of 21 and was deployed to Germany to serve during World War II. He was captured by German soldiers during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944 and was interned in one of the main settings of the novel, Dresden. He did indeed live in a slaughterhouse and worked in a factory making malt syrup for pregnant women. He also witnessed firsthand the bombing of Dresden and did indeed have to excavate the dead bodies from the rubble of the destroyed city. It's extremely interesting that the novel is autobiographical in a sense, but Vonnegut adds Billy's peculiar ability to become unstuck in time to separate the story from reality. I interpreted the novel as being Vonnegut's way of discussing the trauma he went through during the war. Instead of talking about himself directly, he replaced himself by using the story of Billy Pilgrim as his outlet to discuss his feelings on the topic. I think this would likely make it easier for him to process his experiences because while it is based on himself, he is mentally taking himself out of the situation and putting Billy in it. So, next we're going to be discussing the psychological impacts of the war and how it impacted Billy. Many of the men and women who serve in the military are left psychologically impacted from the horrors that they endure. I think Billy Pilgrim was extremely affected by World War II, and that's the cause of him believing he can time travel. He likely suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, and it may have led for him to develop schizophrenia or some other type of disorder. This time traveling is all in his head, and it is his way of attempting to deal with the things that he saw during the war. Whenever Billy becomes unstuck in time, he is either experiencing something from his past, aka a memory, or he is traveling to the alien planet of Tralfamadore, which he has made up in his head. When analyzing his encounters from the Tralfamadorians, they are very closely mirrored to his experiences with the German soldiers during the war. He's captured by them just like he was the Germans, and when he's put on display in the zoo, it would likely be very similar to how he would have felt while being paraded through Germany as a prisoner of war. There are other parallels that can be seen between the Tralfamadorians and the Germans, which is what leads me to believe that they are the same memories. He's just making up the aliens as a way to help himself cope. Lastly, I'll be ending with the end comments, including challenges of the novel, outline of my paper's argument, and some final questions. Challenges. The only challenge of any kind that I experienced when reading the novel was just the time jumps back and forth. Most of the time it was easy to follow along, but there were a few times where I would get confused about what year Billy was in and where it stood on his timeline. Overall, it wasn't a huge issue, and Vonnegut made them fairly seamless, but there were a few instances where I got a little lost. My paper's argument. It isn't 100% established yet, but I do know I want to continue talking about the psychology aspects as well as the philosophy aspects included in the novel, which is just a broad topic, but I do plan to narrow it down further. I want to write about these topics for my paper because they're important parts of the novel, especially if you interpreted it the same way I did. And I find these topics genuinely interesting, and I'd like to talk about them a little bit more. Questions. So, I did have a question, kind of based on the assumption that Billy's time traveling isn't real, so it might not be a real question to ask Kurt Vonnegut, but I was just curious whether or not he knew someone and based Billy's character on someone he knew that actually had really deeply been affected by the war psychologically, and also wondering if Kurt Vonnegut did any research on PTSD or any other kind of psychological issues war can cause, or if he just based it on his own prior knowledge of the subject. And that's the end of my presentation. If you interpreted the novel differently than me, I at least hope you enjoyed hearing a different perspective, and thanks everyone for listening.